Back in the day, your grandparents didn't fight every insect they saw. They understood that some belonged in the rows, working quietly to protect the harvest. Bees, beetles, flies, and even wasps were partners in pollination and pest control. These tiny helpers were the unseen workforce that kept vegetables plentiful and blossoms radiant. Here are 20 beneficial insects that keep gardens thriving, starting with the garden's most misunderstood allies. Wasps. When it comes to wasps, many people think of stings and summer picnics gone sour. But your grandma saw something else. Lean hunters that kept caterpillars and flies in check. Wasps stalked tomato worms, chewed beetle grubs, and snatched flies from the air, feeding them to their own young. They worked without wages, stripping infestations before they grew into plagues. Their role wasn't gentle, but it was necessary. Your grandparents knew how to attract wasps without fear. They planted dill, fennel, and parsley, letting the umbels bloom into flat landing pads loaded with nectar. The wasps, drawn in by flowers, stayed on as pest patrols. They allowed a few hedges and hollow stalks to stand, offering shelter for solitary nesters. Some even set shallow troughs of water, watched as wasps sipped and returned to their watch. To those who tended the land, a garden visited by wasps was a garden guarded, and they let these hunters do their silent work. Lady beetles, ladybugs. Your grandparents never panicked at the sight of aphids crowding the tender tips of beans or roses. They knew who would come calling soon enough, the spotted beetles we call ladybugs. These small, bright beetles were more than pretty visitors. They were voracious cleaners of the garden. Each larva, shaped more like an alligator than a beetle, could devour dozens of aphids in a day, stripping colonies from stems and saving leaves from curling into useless knots. By the time the beetles matured, the worst of the infestation had vanished, leaving behind healthier plants and clean growth. Your folks made their yards into welcoming places for these allies. They scattered marigolds and dill, calendula and yarrow, blooms that kept lady beetles fed when pests ran thin. They resisted the urge to tidy every corner, leaving straw piles and hollow stems for winter shelter. In return, the ladybugs repaid them with vigilance, patrolling every crop row. Where lady beetles thrived, vegetables stood stronger, and the garden needed fewer interventions from human hands. Lacewings. Your grandparents would smile at the shimmer of lacewings drifting through the dusk, knowing that delicate beauty hid fierce appetites. Though the adults sipped nectar and honeydew, their larvae, the so-called aphid lions, prowled among tomato leaves, cabbage hearts, and rosebuds with unmatched hunger. They seized pests like aphids, mites, and young caterpillars with hooked jaws, draining them dry and tossing aside the husks. A single lacewing brood could clean entire patches of soft-bodied pests before their damage was ever noticed. Gardeners back then kept lacewings close with beds of alyssum and cosmos, coriander, and dill. They left shrubs untrimmed and mulch undisturbed, giving safe cover where eggs and larvae could mature. At twilight, when lacewings fluttered like scraps of green glass through the bean rows, it meant the army was at work. Thanks to them, flowers remained vibrant, and crops swelled without the stunted growth that unchecked pests would bring. Lacewing's presence was quiet assurance that the garden would hold strong. Hoverflies, syrphid flies. Your folks might have mistaken them for bees at first glance, but the way hoverflies hung in midair, darting forward and back, set them apart. Their work was simple yet vital, sipping nectar, brushing pollen from bloom to bloom, filling in as pollinators when bees were scarce. But it was the young that made gardeners nod with approval. Hoverfly larvae slipped through leaves and stems hunting aphids, consuming them by the dozens. In one season, a hoverfly brood could cut an aphid population in half, saving tender shoots from deformity and leaving vegetables free to grow straight and strong. Your grandma attracted hoverflies by planting fennel, dill, and parsley. She welcomed small weedy patches, knowing the wild growth gave larvae a place to shelter. In the summer heat, shallow saucers with pebbles held water for thirsty adults. And when hoverflies circled above zinnias and marigolds, it was a sign. Both pollination and pest control were going well. Praying mantis. Gardeners back then always paused when they spotted a mantis among the beans, its folded arms held as if in prayer. Mantis were hunters of the first order, watching with patience until an insect wandered within reach, then striking with lightning speed. Caterpillars, grasshoppers, flies, beetles. Few escaped those spiked arms. Though mantis took what prey came, even the occasional pollinator, their overall effect was balanced. Too many grasshoppers could strip rows bare, but a mantis's patrol kept numbers in check, ensuring crops had the chance to mature unscathed. Your grandparents encouraged them by keeping a wild edge to the yard. Tall grasses, shrubs, and untrimmed hedgerows where mantis could lay their foamy egg cases. They avoided disturbing those cases through winter, letting the young emerge in spring ready to serve. Spotting one among the cornstalks or resting on a beanpole was always a good omen. Minute pirate bugs. Tiny enough to miss unless you looked closely, minute pirate bugs were another ally your grandparents counted on. Barely an eighth of an inch long, they hunted tirelessly among flowers and foliage, piercing thrips, mites, aphids, and insect eggs with needle-like mouths. Despite their size, their appetite was astonishing, each one destroying hundreds of pests over a season. Your folks planted asters, daisies, and marigolds to draw them near, knowing the bugs would linger where pollen and nectar were close. They allowed strips of clover and alfalfa to bloom, giving pirate bugs steady forage. When infestations of thrips once threatened blossoms, these little hunters often arrived in force, invisible saviors that restored balance without fuss. The result was cleaner blooms, fuller fruit clusters, and fewer pest scars on leaves. Though they worked unseen, their absence was always noticed, and your grandparents made sure never to garden without them. Wheel bugs. Your grandparents knew the garden held more than flowers and vegetables. It held watchmen too, and none looked fiercer than the wheel bug. With its spiny gear-like crest and long beak, this assassin patrolled bean poles and tomato rows, waiting for soft-bodied prey to stumble past. Grasshoppers, beetles, caterpillars, even the dreaded Japanese beetle. Few pests escaped once the wheel bug struck. It pierced them with precision and drained them. Your folks never tried to keep wheel bugs away. Instead, they welcomed the rough-looking guardians. They let hedges stand and wild thickets grow near the garden edge, where wheel bugs could rest and overwinter. They avoided unnecessary sprays, knowing poison would rob them of one of the fiercest allies they had. A garden blessed with wheel bugs was a garden under tight watch, and your grandparents trusted them to keep balance among the rows. Dragonflies. Down by the old water troughs and garden ponds, your grandparents always saw dragonflies gliding like jeweled arrows. These hunters weren't just pretty visitors, they were aerial sentries. A single dragonfly could sweep hundreds of mosquitoes, midges, and gnats from the air in a day, patrolling the yard long after evening chores were done. Their larvae, hidden in shallow water, fed on mosquito wigglers before they could rise. Your folks made sure to give them reason to stay. They left barrels to catch rainwater, and shallow pools near the garden became nurseries for dragonfly young. Shrubs and sticks by the water offered perches for adults to rest between flights. When dragonflies hovered over cucumber vines and bean blossoms, it meant fewer biting pests and a calmer evening in the garden. For your grandparents, the sight of a dragonfly meant the air was clean and the balance was kept. Soldier beetles. When flowers opened wide in midsummer, your grandparents looked closely and often found slim, soft-bodied beetles crawling over petals. The soldier beetles, with their muted orange armor, looked harmless, yet their jaws were always busy. They feasted on aphids and caterpillars, scouring stems for pests that gnawed on tender leaves. When prey was scarce, they lapped nectar and pollen, quietly serving as pollinators too. Your folks planted goldenrod and milkweed, knowing the flowers drew soldier beetles in numbers. They let wildflowers edge the yard, providing steady forage. In turn, the beetles kept infestations from flaring into disasters, leaving plants stronger and blossoms unmarred. Their dual role as hunters and pollinators made them doubly valuable. A garden rich with soldier beetles needed fewer interventions, and your grandparents were grateful for everyone they spotted among the zinnias. Ground beetles. At night, when chores were done and lamps glowed in the windows, another army took to the garden. Ground beetles roamed the soil, feasting on slugs, cutworms, caterpillars, and root-munching grubs. They patrolled the earth beneath cabbages and corn, keeping the hidden world of pests in check. By morning, their work was invisible, but the difference showed in crops that stood tall and leaves left untouched. Your grandparents knew the trick was to give them cover. They left stones, logs, and mulched paths where ground beetles could hide during the day. They avoided tilling every inch, sparing the beetles' eggs and larvae that nestled in the soil. Where ground beetles thrived, plants rooted deeper. These nocturnal guards needed no tending, just a bit of respect, and your grandpa counted them as silent partners in every harvest. Spiders. Your grandparents didn't flinch at webs stretched between bean poles or tucked into tomato cages. They knew spiders weren't intruders, but guardians. They spun traps that caught flies, gnats, beetles, and moths. Any pest foolish enough to wander through. Each web meant fewer pests chewing at night, fewer caterpillars sneaking across cabbages. Even hunting spiders, prowling without silk, consumed their share of troublemakers, leaving the balance in favor of the garden. Your folks made peace with their presence. They left corners undisturbed, hedges untamed, and grasses long at the margins. They knew a tidy garden stripped of all hiding places meant fewer spiders, and fewer spiders meant more pests. With spiders on duty, the garden rested easier, and so did the hands that tended it. Parasitoid wasps. Smaller than a grain of rice, so delicate you could miss them in the blink of an eye, parasitoid wasps were the secret allies of old gardens. These tiny wasps didn't sting gardeners, they sought out pests instead. An aphid, a caterpillar, or a beetle larva became a cradle for their young. Eggs laid inside the pest hatched and consumed it from within, leaving behind a hollow shell where once a pest had lived. To the untrained eye it seemed ruthless, but to the gardener it meant tomatoes untouched by hornworms, cabbages unchewed by imported caterpillars, and roses free of aphid colonies. Your grandparents attracted parasitoid wasps without even knowing their names. They planted sweet alyssum, coriander, and marigolds, flowers with shallow nectar cups fit for tiny wasps. They left a scattering of leaf litter and straw along the rows, knowing such cover harbored the little allies. They held back the sprayer when they could, for one blast of poison could wipe away what nature had spent weeks building. In time, they saw the balance. A caterpillar here, an aphid there, but never an army, never a plague. These wasps made sure of it, working invisibly, guarding every leaf and stem with quiet precision. Bees. Step into an old orchard on a spring morning and you'll hear them before you see them. Bees, heavy with pollen, moving from blossom to blossom as if they'd been hired to work the rows. For centuries, gardeners trusted that where bees were busy, fruit would follow. The simple act of carrying dusted grains of pollen from one flower to the next ensures apples swell, beans fatten, and wildflowers scatter seed for another year. Without bees, the work falls silent, and gardens suffer for it. Their constant droning means more than noise. It means cucumbers curling on the vine, berries blushing in the hedgerow, and seed pods swelling for future planting. Your grandparents knew how to keep them close. They grew herbs like thyme, mint, and borage, knowing the blooms called bees from far off. They left a shallow dish of water with pebbles in the shade, so a thirsty worker could land and drink without drowning. They spared a corner of bare earth or an old log, giving solitary bees places to nest. Tachinid flies. Your grandparents didn't swat every fly they saw. Some, they knew, were allies. The stout, bristled Tachinid flies buzzed quietly through the rows, their adult work simple enough, sipping nectar, resting on sunny leaves. But their true value came later. Female tachinids laid eggs on caterpillars, beetle grubs, and other pests. Soon the larvae burrowed in, feeding until the host collapsed, leaving the crops safe and the balance restored. It was nature's rough justice, but it meant fewer cutworms in the cabbage, fewer hornworms on the tomatoes, fewer borers in the squash. Your folks made room for them by planting clover, dill, and asters, flowers with open heads where adult flies could drink. They left small wild edges undisturbed, places where tachinids could find hosts to keep their line alive. To the casual eye, they were ordinary flies. But to your grandparents, they were hidden protectors, trading the life of a pest for the health of the harvest. Damsel Bugs. Among bean rows and carrot tops, your grandparents sometimes spotted slim, tan-colored insects with long legs and piercing beaks. These were damsel bugs, and though small, they were tireless hunters. They pierced aphids, mites, caterpillars, and insect eggs, feeding on pests that would otherwise multiply unchecked. Damsel bugs moved quickly, stalking their prey across leaves, leaving behind cleaner foliage and fewer infestations. Gardeners back then invited them by planting alfalfa, clover, and vetch, crops that doubled as forage and cover. They kept flowers blooming through the season, giving adults nectar to sip when hunting slowed. With damsel bugs at work, pests fell before they spread. Crops grew straighter, fruit matured better, and the need for powders or sprays shrank. Your folks counted them among the quiet helpers that kept the garden thriving year after year. Assassin bugs. Your grandparents never chased assassin bugs away. They lurked with their curved beaks ready, waiting for grasshoppers, caterpillars, and beetles to cross their path. When they struck, the prey was finished in moments, drained dry, and dropped. They were not picky, but their appetite for pests far outweighed the occasional casualty among neutral insects. A garden with assassins meant caterpillar numbers stayed low, and leaf damage was kept in check without human hands lifting a spray can. Your folks knew how to keep them close. They let hedges and weeds at the margins grow, providing cover and resting spots. They resisted clearing every patch of brush for assassin bugs' preferred places of refuge. Some perched on bean poles, others in corn tassels, but wherever they waited, they served as guardians. To your grandparents, they were fierce allies, enforcing balance through patience and precision. Braconid Wasps. Although they were too tiny to notice, Braconid Wasps were among the most valued allies in your grandparents' gardens. They sought out caterpillars, beetles, and aphids, laying eggs inside them. Soon, the pests carried a cargo of wasp larvae that slowly consumed them from within. A tomato hornworm, once a scourge of the vines, became a nursery. When the wasp brood emerged, the pest was no more, and the plants stood safe. Your grandparents sowed fennel, dill, and sweet alyssum to draw Braconid wasps in. They allowed some weeds to bloom at the garden's edge, small blossoms serving as nectar stations for the adults. They left leaf litter and mulch where the wasps could rest and overwinter. In return, these invisible sentinels patrolled ceaselessly, thinning out pests before they could ravage a row. To the seasoned eye, the sight of a parasitized hornworm bristling with white cocoons wasn't grotesque, it was victory. Predatory Mites. Where leaves curled with spider mites or soil teemed with tiny larvae, your grandparents trusted in a counterforce, predatory mites. Too small for most eyes, these hunters patrolled under leaves and across soil grains, piercing pests and sucking them dry. They feasted on spider mites, thrips, and fungus gnat larvae, restoring balance before outbreaks turned crops sickly. Their work went unseen, but the results were clear. Beans that thrived without yellowing, cucumbers that bore without withering vines, seedlings that stood tall instead of collapsing in damp soil. Your folks encouraged them by keeping soil moist and rich in organic matter, conditions that suited beneficial mites while discouraging the pests. They avoided harsh chemicals that would wipe out friend and foe alike. Some even introduced straw mulch or compost to provide microhabitats where mites could breed. Though invisible, they were tireless custodians. Without them, spider mites might web entire leaves. With them, the garden breathed easier. Rove Beetles. Your grandparents were never startled by the quick flash of a rove beetle darting across damp soil. These narrow-bodied hunters, often with shortened wing covers, devoured aphids, mites, and small larvae, but were especially prized for their taste for slugs and fly maggots hiding near compost heaps or manure piles. Wherever decay drew pests, Rove Beetles followed, keeping the balance steady. Your grandparents kept them close by laying thick mulch, scattering compost, and leaving damp corners where beetles could hide by day. They valued the beetles' loyalty to the soil, knowing each night brought quiet cleansing beneath the leaves. In the morning, seedlings stood straighter, roots dug deeper, and losses to unseen soil pests were fewer. These beetles worked unseen, but your grandparents counted them as a secret militia underfoot. Spined soldier bugs. Your grandparents spotted them among beans and potatoes, since their bodies always blended into the green. The spined soldier bug carried a needle-like mouthpart, piercing caterpillars, beetle larvae, and other soft-bodied intruders. Once struck, the prey was drained, leaving the crops safe. They became quiet soldiers on the side of the garden, reducing the numbers of cutworms and armyworms before they could strip whole rows. Your folks kept them near with flowering herbs like dill and marigold, and by keeping weedy borders alive with nectar. They understood that soldier bugs, once settled, patrolled without pause. A garden with spined soldier bugs meant sturdier vegetables and less leaf chewing. Which of these insects do you notice most in your own backyard? Let us know in the comments below. If you learned something new today, please hit subscribe. See you in the next one.